We are live now.
Okay. Good morning, everyone. Sorry, we are a little late today because of some technical issues, but I think let's get going. So, actually, yesterday, after the lecture got over, I realized that I did not come back to the question of how the heavier elements which are heavier than iron, how are they synthesized in the universe. So, as I mentioned that basically when you try to create elements which are heavier than iron, the main issue remains is that what that comes up is that one actually needs to provide energy in order for that fusion to happen, and that so it means that you need some energetic process, and that will enable elements which are lighter than iron or iron like elements to be like to fuse and form more heavier ones. And one of the processes that astronomers have understood for a very long time is this nucleosynthesis in supernovae. Supernova, as I've mentioned, are very explosive events which release a lot of energy. And these heavier elements like so far like till very recently, this was our understanding that we were that these elements are being created in the such supernova explosions. And so because in a supernova, as you know, that a lot of material is ejected, and then they are like there is a stream of neutrons also which pass through them. So this basically neutron enrichment of nuclei happens, and this happens with in a process that is known as that is known as R process, namely rapid process. I won't go into the details. So this is one of the methods. But very recently, what has also happened is that it has been realized that basically merger of neutron stars is probably a very major source of elements which are heavier than iron. And first of all, these neutron stars merge that people knew, but that they merge was sort of observed using the gravitational waves when such an event was detected via by the detection of the gravitational waves which are generated due to such a merger. And in that process, the collision of two neutron stars, it causes ejection of significant amount of neutron rich matter. So enriching neutron gives rise to that. And so the neutron star, and this event was went by the name of GW 170817, which was detected by the LIGO Virgo observatory in 2017. But then subsequently, in 2019, astronomers actually went and observed. So basically, the associated very bright electromagnetic radiation from that event, because often such mergers are accompanied by events which give rise to very bright optical illumination as well as gamma rays. So some of the gamma ray bursts actually could be arising from these neutron star mergers. That is the idea. And so this was the associated optical brightness was called the kilonova. Nova means very bright, and kilo means it's also very even brighter. And in the spectrum of that, it was strontium was observed, and then it was realized that actually, and then obviously the the nuclear physics calculations followed, and that showed that basically the merger of neutron stars is also a very important source of the heavier elements in the universe. Okay, so now I will move on. I'll start with today's lecture, and today we'll be learning a bit about our galaxy and the material which is between the stars. So we learned about the stars in the last lecture. So now our galaxy, so this is a photograph, maybe some of you have seen it sometime when you are Googling something. So this is basically a patch of the sky, and you see these small dots, sort of bright dots that you see, those are stars, and the stars are also here. But then also you see a very dark patch between the illuminated part, and that I will tell you is our galaxy. So we'll see how that is our galaxy. And this is a picture from taken on the top of the Mauna Kea mountain in Hawaii. These are two telescopes which go by the name of Keck telescope. So they are 10-meter class telescopes. Two of them work simultaneously. And this is yet another telescope. This is which operates in all three operate in optical and near infrared wavelengths. This is the Subaru 8-meter telescope. Okay, so now, so this is so there is a potential problem in understanding what our galaxy is like, because we are located inside it. We can see things on the sky. We can look at other galaxies because they are far away. So depending on how they are oriented relative to us, we can study them. But for our galaxy, since it is often difficult to see go beyond a certain limit when you are sitting inside the system. But astronomers have been very creative, and even with very limited resources, they actually figured out what our galaxy could be looking like. And the first such efforts, which well, there are many efforts. The first such well documented efforts were by William and Caroline Herschel. Caroline Herschel was, by the way, was the first professional astronomer, like woman astronomer. So astronomer who actually got paid for the job. So they were brothers and sisters, William and Caroline. And so what they did was, so this was a standard thing, like in those days, people used to observe the stars. So they counted stars along 683 lines of sight. Like they looked around and they counted stars along various directions of sight. And what they constructed, so this is the Herschel galaxy. So they said that it's like a flat kind of a distribution, and so it's like a flat grindstone, which 5:1 means it's extended 5 times more than it is extending in the other direction. And they place the sun at the center of the of such a galaxy. So once again, since I will use the this distance unit parsec pretty frequently, so this is the conversion to centimeter, or that's what if you want to keep that in mind, because on the galaxy, for the galaxies, we'll talk in terms of kiloparsecs. So, but then came Captain. So Captain was also an astronomer, and he also did similar star counts. And but what he did, he once again also he also estimated the distances to these stars, and he came up with the first model, which said that our galaxy is like a flattened disk with 15 kiloparsecs across and 3 kiloparsecs thick. So this is like a very condensed cylinder, if you may want. So these are all from counting the stars around us. But the major thing that Captain said was that the sun is located slightly off center. In contrast to the Herschel universe, they said that it is located slightly off center. So this shows you how he might have constructed the. So this is a plot from his paper, and this shows you how he might have constructed what the distribution of the stars in the galaxy might be by looking at observing stars along different lines of sight. And and here you see that how, so because he's also measuring the distances, he gets an idea about the length scales over which the stars are distributed. So next came the first model, which was like, well, the more advanced model, I would say, because that was based on more observations which were more precise and well documented. So it was by Harlow Shapley. So what he did was he studied distribution of globular clusters. So globular clusters are actually old star clusters which roughly have 1 million stars, and they are very densely packed. And so they are pretty easy to observe. So being a cluster, they actually have a large number of stars and different types of stars. And one such type of star in the globular clusters are RR Lyrae. So these are a type of stars which actually have a very well understood pulsation pulsation property. And using that pulsation property or period of pulsation, it is possible to find how far away the star is. I won't go into the details, but they actually measure. So considering that these RR Lyrae stars are in those globular clusters, Shapley measured the distances to these globular clusters, and what he found was that these globular clusters are uniformly located above and below the Milky Way. So there is a particular direction in the sky in which you see an enhancement in the stellar distribution, and that you say that, okay, that is the sort of the plane of the Milky Way. And then but he found that they are equally distributed above and below. So this is a plot from Shapley's paper, so, or means it's a representation of his result. And so this is what he found. The green dots are the globular clusters, and this along this side angle, along this direction, you see the distances written in kiloparsec. So, but he estimated the diameter of the Milky Way, and he also found that the globular clusters are concentrated in the sky towards the Sagittarius. Now, this term Sagittarius, or the name Sagittarius, actually came up when we talked about the supermassive compact object at the center of our galaxy. So yes, the Sagittarius constellation and the Sagittarius is located close to the center of the galaxy, or at the center of the galaxy is Sagittarius A star. So now, so Shapley determined the distance of the diameter of the Milky Way to be 100 kiloparsec, which is which is really different from what Kaplan got, because Kaplan, if you recall, got 15 kiloparsecs, but he placed Sun quite far from the galactic center. So there are two issues. One is the size, and the other is where are we located, because the distance between Sun and us is so small that we can consider ourselves, for in the context of the entire galaxy, to be located exactly on the Sun. So where are we located? Some people put us very close to the galactic center, and some people put us sort of sufficiently away. And Shapley's model actually placed it quite far from the galactic center, unlike the previous model by Kaplan, which placed the Sun close to the center. Now, I will give one statement, and I will justify why this is so. Both Shapley and Kaplan, what they were doing, they were counting stars, right? They were looking at various directions, observing stars and counting them. And what they did not take into account is that there is a lot of material between the stars. They did not know, means obviously they did not know at that time. So now, how do we know that there is a lot of material which is between the stars? So the matter which is between the stars is called the interstellar medium. And here on the left-hand side, you see an image or in the optical wavelengths. So which means that observations which are done in the optical wavelengths. And so this is a region in the Orion. And this is called the Horsehead Nebula. The name is obvious, because you see a dark Horsehead which is rising up. So these bright spots are stars, but you see that there is actually, the darkness is not really, there's nothing. It's basically, there is something. And this is what is called a silhouette. Like if you have a very dark object and you illuminate it from behind. So here the illumination is by the stars. And so then you see a silhouette of the star, actually it is the material which is between the stars. And this is called the Horsehead Nebula because of the name. And how do we further know that there is actually material? Instead of optical, if we look at it in the infrared, then we do see it in emission. So why do we see it in emission? That's because anything which is warm will emit, and what it emits depends on the temperature. So if it has a temperature of around, say, 300 Kelvin, then the wavelengths where it will emit are really infrared. In optical, the entire radiation from the stars is completely absorbed by one of the components of the interstellar medium. So what we know about the interstellar space right now is that it is filled with dust and gas. So dust are some actually solid particles. We will talk about them a little bit more in detail. And it is the dust which is the culprit. It absorbs and scatters the starlight when it passes through the interstellar medium. So dust is what causes the absorption or the removal of optical wavelengths or radiation in the optical wavelengths from our view. And so this makes, and also this, what happens is that, so if it is absorbing part of the radiation, then it also makes it makes the object look fainter. So when something is fainter, you assume, so there can be two possibilities that, so if you see that something is faint, you will say that, oh, it must be very far away. So they actually look fainter. Otherwise, they would have looked brighter if there was no interstellar dust. So what this means is that, so in the, say, like when Shapley or Kaplan were counting the stars and sort of finding some stars to be faint, they were assuming that they are far away. But what if there is a sort of cloud of gas and dust in between, and the dust is actually absorbing or scattering away part of the radiation, so that the net radiation which is coming to us is much reduced. So if you consider the faintness of the object that you are observing to be due to the object being far away, you are actually overestimating the distance, whereas it is actually much nearer by, but there is a screen in between which absorbs part of it. So that was the problem with both Kaplan and Shapley's models of the galaxy. And before I go back to the what do we know about our galaxy, let me just also say that how else did people come to know or discover that there is dust and gas. So first, let's talk about that there is some interstellar gas. Of course, people knew about stars. So in 1904, so if this is once again, so we have been discussing such effects that, so this is a case of a binary star. In a binary star, it's similar to basically star, planet, or whichever. So it's a binary star, so two stars going around each other. So, and for each star, we can actually observe the spectra of the various lines or absorption lines, which we can see from them. So various lines due to various elements or ions. And but then what happens is that since this is a binary, depending on what my line of sight is, sometimes the star is coming, each star is coming towards me, and sometimes it's going away from me. So as I've been telling you, that means that it's either, so the frequencies of the spectral line will get red shifted or blue shifted, depending on whether they are moving away from us or coming towards us respectively. So we expect such behavior. We expect, and if we are not able to see them, so if they're moving faster, so it means that we will keep seeing them shifting around. Now, what happens what Hartmann found is that there are, in addition to the broad lines, so these the stellar absorption lines are pretty broad. We saw that in the solar spectrum, like when we looked at the Fraunhofer lines, they are pretty broad lines. So what Hartmann observed is that, he found that basically, in addition to the broad lines, so here you see that they basically, these are the broad stellar lines, absorption lines due to the star. And as you see that as the star goes the star moves around the orbit, one of the stars, this is around its orbit, so the same line shifts in wavelength. So here it is plotted as wavelength. So all the lines, this dip which is plotted between the blue and the red line, this blue shift and red shift is due to the star. But in addition, Hartmann also observed that there are quite a few narrow and stationary absorption lines. So which means that you see that even when the stellar absorption line is moving, these lines are not moving, and they are definitely much narrow. They are like spikes compared to these lines. So then what does it mean? So because the stars are hot, and that's why they show these broad lines, but then this must be coming. So then what did he conclude? He concluded that these lines must not be coming from the stars. There is actually some material between the stars and the observer. And as a result of, and it is the absorption of the stellar light by this cloud is what is causing these absorption lines. Because this cloud is not moving relative to us, it will always show the absorption lines at the same wavelength or frequency. And why are they narrow? They are narrow because they are much colder. So as a star, as you know, is something like 5,000 Kelvin to 10,000 Kelvin, and even it could also be warmer, like 40,000 Kelvin is also possible. Whereas these, the material between the stars is actually much colder, and even 100 Kelvin is really a warm interstellar medium, as you will see. So this led to the discovery of gas in the interstellar medium. So that is one part. And as I said, that the interstellar medium consists of gas and dust. And so how was the dust discovered? So here you see that this is a plot. This is obviously a modern observation of an optical image of a region, and all the fine bright spots that you see are stars. But what you also notice is that there are some holes. There are some dark patches in the sky. So there could be two reasons. One thing is that maybe there are no stars there. That's possible. And the other possibility is that, okay, there are stars, but there may also be something between us and those stars, which is absorbing all the light that is coming out of those stars. And the second case actually is true. So actually, the people started pretty early enough, and then they marked these large portions, and they actually cataloged a large number of dark objects. So these apparent holes in sky later were explained by, so they were explained that, okay, those are not really places which do not have any star, but they are created by the obscuration of the light of many background stars by an intervening cloud. So these are often known as Bok globules, named after the astronomer Bartjes Bok. So now, but then it was how the conclusive proof of it was given by Robert Trumpler. He did a small experiment in which once again he looked at a large number, about 100 open star clusters. So open star clusters, in contrast to the globular clusters, are young clusters, which means that they are intrinsically, they have more they have brighter stars, because I have mentioned earlier that the massive stars, they are brighter and they sort of evolve faster. So in an old system, there will be fewer bright stars than the in a new system, but so open star. So anyways, so Trumpler observed them. Now let us consider what happens. So there are two issues here. One thing is that if something is far away from us, the apparent size of the object on the sky becomes smaller. So if I know the distance to the object, I can measure what would be the if I know what is the if I know the distance to the object, then I can measure what is the actual size by measuring the sky, or derive what is the actual size by measuring the sky size on the sky. So that is this. So the distance expected from the size will be, so this is the angular size that we see on the sky. And if d is the actual size of the object, so then if r is the distance to the object, then this angular size will be related to the diameter of the object by the distance to the object. Now, diameter of the object in this case is the diameter of the open cluster, the cluster of stars, because we are not seeing them as individual stars. The other effect that you expect is that when you remove such a cluster very far away from you, you actually have beaming of light, right? So we learned that. So the flux reduces, because what happens is that if you construct consecutively, successively increasing spheres of, if you construct spheres of successively increasing radii, then you are spreading the same radiation over a larger surface area. So by the time it reaches you, you are actually part of a much larger sphere. So the per unit area flux radiation that you are receiving is much smaller, and that is exactly what is expressed here. So which means that you can also derive a distance by, if you know the actual luminosity of the star and you measure the flux. So from that also you derive an estimate of r. So now if you do both experiments, if you do both kind of calculations, what you would expect is that you should get the same value of r using both, right? But this is what Trumpler got. So the dotted straight line is what is expected. So there should be a correlation, because the distances found, we are observing the same object. So distances found by the two methods should be identical. But what he found instead was that as the distances grew larger, basically so basically, even for although the distance actually didn't grow larger, the distance derived from the flux of the stars seemed to be larger. So what he concluded was that, so there is obscuration. So the light is being obscured. The size of the object doesn't change, because the apparent size it just shows this, because this is not dependent on the amount of light, like at the first level. So he concluded that there must be material between us which is making the stars look fainter, and as a result we are concluding that the distances are much larger. And this was a conclusive proof of the existence of the interstellar dust. So I will stop here and take questions.
There are no questions, ma'am, as of now.
Okay, fine. So everything is clear. Let me just continue.
Oh,
So is there something? No.
yeah, it just came up. What is
Yeah.
the composition of interstellar medium? But I think you will come to it.
Yeah, I will talk about it. Oh,
Yeah.
so as of now, as I said, gas and dust. So dust are solid particles. So now let's take a look at. So this is what we know about our galaxy. So now what has happened is, so as I said, the Shapley's model was largely correct. Now, so if you remember, Shapley. But he gave the distance, this size of the galaxy to be 100 kiloparsec, but he correctly pointed out that the sun is actually pretty off center, like it's not at the galactic center, but pretty removed from the galactic center. It was largely correct, but it had to be corrected. So this current model is largely Shapley's model, but has to be corrected for the interstellar absorption, because that's what gave him these very large distances. He interpreted all the fainter objects to be very far away. Actually, they were nearby, but they were being obscured by the dust. So now, and the other thing is that, so now galaxies come in various shapes and sizes, and for our galaxy, obviously we do not see it very clearly, but what we see here is that so this is an image of another galaxy, and such galaxies, if you notice that they look like a spiral. So there is like a giant flywheel. So you have like arms which are like so go in spirals. So our galaxy, based on the various parameters that we can measure, is also concluded to be a spiral galaxy. It has a flattened disk of stars and a central bulge. So this is the disk, and there is a central bulge. And the disk is about 30 kiloparsecs in diameter and about 1 kiloparsec thick at the position of the sun. So thickness is in the in the vertical direction, if you may. So if this is the galactic plane, then in the vertical direction, the thickness is measured. And the other thing is that, as I have told you, when I've discussed the discovery of the supermassive object at the center of our galaxy, that much of the center and much of the galactic plane that is here is obscured by the interstellar dust in the plane of our galaxy, which makes it very difficult for us to observe things in our galactic plane. We can do a fine job for galaxies which are far away, but not so well for our initially not so well for our galaxy. But now, of course, with the improvement of techniques available, it has been possible to understand our galactic plane also much better. Okay, so now going a little bit more into details, what are the primary components? So this, when I say components, these are, you have to also understand that the galaxy is, it's a rotating disk. So there is some dynamics also involved, and this galaxy modeling is entirely like a field of its own. And what it does is that it considers that all the dynamical components of the galaxy and then tries to explain the stability of such a disk, because you can be rotating something, but then why does it stay stable for so long? What is the variation? So when something rotates, then it might be doing something, it might be wobbling. On what time scales does it wobble? Do we see something which, well, observationally, do we see that? If yes, then can we explain it with the components? So this is something which the dynamicists, the galactic dynamicists typically work on. So the primary components, and all these components are basically like stellar components, like what the so to the basic extent, because the mass is in the stars mostly. The stars are the most massive objects. So now this is the disk, the bulge. So the disk is this one, and the bulge, and there is a larger and much sparsely populated halo. So these are the three primary components, and as you see that there are actually finer distinctions. So the disk itself is supposed to be consisting of two components, the thick and the thin disk. So thickness is in terms of their extent beyond the galactic plane, so above and below the galactic plane. So as you can see, so this blue one is the thin disk, but the blue one, although it is the thin disk, it is actually has the most stellar content, and it contains the relatively younger stars and has a lot of dust and gas, and this is the site for star formation, current star formation. And the thick disk, which is shown in this using the green color, this spreads out more, and it consists of stars which are like older, like, because so it is possible to derive the ages of the stars looking at their metal contents. I will not go into the details, you can do that later. And but this the thick disk actually has so if you consider at the galactic midplane, the thick disk actually has only 8.5% of the stellar density of the thin disk. But of course, it is thick because it has a larger scale height, in the sense that it spreads more in the vertical direction on both sides of the galactic plane. And the total mass within the galactic center, within 15 kiloparsec of the center, like, so this is the 30 kiloparsec diameter. So that is about 10 to the 11 solar mass, and of which the stars contribute half the mass. And the interstellar gas, which mostly consists of hydrogen and helium. This I've been telling repeatedly that the main elements are hydrogen and helium, and the heavier elements are found in smaller quantities. So that is so it's like and they constitute about 0.7 times 7 into 10 to the 9 solar mass. And additionally, so this part I will not go into at all. There is evidence that there is some mass which we are not able to see. We do not know what it is, but it cannot be detected using the standard methods of detection, because this mass doesn't. We do not know the kind of things with which interact, because in order to detect something, the material has to interact with that thing. So this, as you see, contributes as much mass to the galaxy as the stars. So this is overall, that's what we understand about the galaxy. So now just to go back to this picture, so this one is obviously an artist's impression. So this also I also have here. So this also tells you that so we always have to put some coordinate system to understand, like to tell you, like I can tell you that okay, this is to my right, to my left, it's indefinite. But what I should be telling you is that, like, I should set up a coordinate system and then tell you where in that coordinate system is a particular astrophysical object located. And for a galaxy, so this is an artist impression of our galaxy. As you can see that it also has this multiple, these are called spiral arms, as we saw in the previous picture of another galaxy. So if we reconstructed the spiral arms that we see using various other methods in our galaxy, this is what our galaxy would look like. And the direction towards the galactic center is considered to be 0 degree longitude. So this is similar to the say the geographical longitude, and basically things which are above and below are so they are marked by, so you have circles or which are parallel to the galactic plane, which give you the latitudes. So that is how it is done. So now this, so going back to this picture which I had shown at the beginning of the talk. So this middle part is basically the galactic plane, because there is a lot of dust in here. It is absorbing the stellar radiation, and that's why we see this as this is called a dark lane kind of thing. But of course, in the infrared, this can be observed. Okay, so I think I'll stop once again and see if there are any questions.
Yes, ma'am, there are a few questions. Okay, the first question is, how do we measure the luminosity of the star in the graph which you had shown?
Yeah, so the luminosity of the star, okay, that will be a bit of a detail. Basically, for the stars, there are stars for which so stars can be divided into spectral types, and for particular spectral types, we do know what is the luminosity. So these are that's how they can be determined, and additionally, there are also particular stars which show certain variation of their luminosities or intensities as a function of time. So that is called the period luminosity relation. So we can using that. So we also can use that. So the luminosity is something you can measure, and knowing the type of star and knowing the star, like understanding what star, it is possible by using spectroscopic method, because there is a detailed classification. That is a lot of detail I do not have time to do.
Okay, the next question is, under like open and globular clusters, in which of the clusters do stars from on the main sequence form?
So the stars are forming, the new stars, young stars are all in the open cluster. Globular clusters are old clusters. So they are basically the clusters also evolve. See, the clusters are like these multi-particle systems that we talked about. So basically they are particles and they are interacting with each other in whatever way, and so they sort of thermalize, virialize. So then the globular clusters are actually more evolved states of say open clusters. The connection is not always very direct, but globular clusters typically have older stars.
Okay, one more question. The interstellar dust, does it disperse the radiation of the stars, or it absorbs it?
So we will see that it does both. It absorbs and scatters. So we will talk about the dust. Okay, so Pritesh, I'll go ahead and
okay.
I'll take.
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah. So now let's just enumerate or make a list of bucket list of what are the what does the interstellar medium consist of. So as I said, it consists of gas. So the gas can be ions, atoms, molecules. Even molecules do exist in the interstellar medium, and most of the time the velocity distributions are thermal. So that is, okay. And then so then we have also interstellar dust. So interstellar dust is something. So these are small solid particles. They have sizes less than 1 micron in size, and they are mixed with the gas, and they actually contribute only 1% by mass to the ISM. But then they also, that's not their effect is much more than the 1% by mass. That's what we will see. So in addition, there are cosmic rays. So I have spoken about cosmic rays. So these are very high energy particles. These are ions or electrons which have kinetic energies which far exceed thermal energy. So you cannot explain the cosmic rays using some temperatures. They are accelerated using by other mechanisms, things like Fermi acceleration, etc. And these are highly relativistic objects, highly relativistic particles. Additionally, we have there is also interstellar magnetic field. If you recall, we spoke about synchrotron radiation, and in that I said that there is an all-pervasive magnetic field in the universe, and the interstellar medium is no exception. So the interstellar medium has a magnetic field with of strength between 5 to 20 microgauss. Although the origin of it is not fully understood, but this magnetic field, what it does is, because these cosmic rays are charged particles, it guides the charged particles, and it is also strong enough to be dynamically important. So recall that when we discussed about the Jeans mass, we said I derived the case where the fluid sphere was supported just by the thermal pressure. But in addition, if there are magnetic fields, then what happens is that it restricts the motion of the charged particles. So as a result of it, there is a resistance to collapse, because collapse means the particles have to like move, physically moves. But if they're if the magnetic fields are there, then they'll be constrained to move only along the magnetic field lines, and that creates some kind of pressure which prevents the collapse to a certain extent as well. So this is important for dynamics of the system, like how it collapses or how structure forms as well. Magnetic field. So understanding the magnetic fields is very important. It's not complete, but it's very important. And finally, of course, there is gravitational field, because all matter in the galaxy so there will be stars which are massive. So there obviously there are and also in the interstellar medium there will be regions which have which have high gravitational, well, because of the gravitational potentials in those places, it leads to self-gravitating clouds, and which finally form stars. We will see that in the next lecture. And now the one thing take-home message that you can take a screenshot of this slide, etc., and see that. So basically, the separation. So the Milky Way, if you consider, and that's true for most galaxies, is largely empty. If you consider the separation between stars in the solar neighborhood, it's about 2 parsecs. The radius of the heliosphere, so which means that sun and all its planets and like the Kuiper belt and the asteroid belt, everything put together, it's something like 235 AU. So 1 AU is something like 1.5 10 to the 11. So this is about 10 to the, it's about 7 10 to the 6 10 to the 16 meters, and this is about 1.5 well 200 times this. So this is something like 10 to the 13 meters. So now consider volumes of those. So if we do that, which means that this, so now it is this part which is filled up. So this is our sun and its planet fill up only a very small amount of the volume which is between our sun and its nearest star. So the stars and the planetary systems, they fill up only about 2 into 10 to the minus 10 of the available space by volume. So that tells you that stars, although they seem to be very important, they are important dynamically also, they're important, but they actually by volume they are not important. Rather, it is the interstellar medium which fills up the rest of the space. So now let's consider, just to wrap it up. So now you consider the enormity or the openness of the interstellar medium. So the interstellar medium is truly an open medium. So what are the things which are happening here? You have the stars, which are bound systems, like systems which are under self-gravity, and they are burning. There is nuclear burning happening in there. So the stars, and as a result of which the stars are producing photons, and these photons, and also beyond a certain point, as I said, the stars lose mass. So they are also pushing out material into the interstellar medium. So it pumps all of those things into the interstellar medium. So as a result of which the interstellar, the kinetic energy, the thermal energy, chemical energy, and all sorts of things in the interstellar medium go increase. Additionally, there will also be photons which are coming from other galaxies. So the extragalactic background photons. So all of those things come into the interstellar medium, and then finally they get processed in the interstellar medium, and then they leave the interstellar medium as in the form of and causing the interstellar medium to cool, and they leave into the cold sky in that sense. So the thing is that all of this means that the interstellar medium is far from any kind of equilibrium. Thermodynamic equilibrium is one equilibrium that you are probably familiar with. And this non-equilibrium state is maintained by the input of free energy. So all of these, so as I say, the stars as well as the extragalactic background photons are pumping energy into the interstellar medium. And there is also a, in photons as well as the matter which the stars are pumping. So even the supernova explosion creates a lot of like pumps a lot of energy into the interstellar medium, and finally all that energy injected into the interstellar medium leaves the system, is lost from the galaxy, because the galaxy itself is radiating. So it is a very dynamic system in that sense. Okay. So now now how are the interstellar gas, how is the interstellar gas observed? So I told you about the first discovery of interstellar gas. So this is another example. We now have, of course, much better understanding that there is interstellar gas. We have much better observing telescopes and instruments on them. And so these are two of these, both of these show spectra of which are due to interstellar gas. On the left hand side, this is a spectrum which is observed in the far infrared, and you see multiple lines. All of these lines actually arise from molecules, the molecules like water and many other organic molecules, and these are all directed towards the Orion Nebula, which is a very bright star forming region in the very close to us. And here you see another type of spectra. These are the lines. This is the spectrum due to the 21 centimeter line of atomic hydrogen. So as I say, the main constituent of interstellar gas is hydrogen, and much of it is in atomic form. So when you have an atomic gas, it will have its spectral lines, and one of the lines that atomic hydrogen shows is a hyperfine transition. Please look up what a hyperfine transition is, and that is at a wavelength of 21 centimeter. So interestingly, what you see is that this line can be observed in, you can sometimes see absorption dips due to that line, which means that here what we are measuring are the clouds which are in the line of sight of some bright object and us, and they're cold enough, and what they are doing is they are just absorbing that part of the emission, that part of the background radiation. So here the background source is this this is some astronomical name of some continuum source. It's probably a quasar, and so for that you see so then the intervening, we are seeing the absorption due to the intervening atomic cloud, and in contrast we also can see the emission from the absorbing emission from cloud, hydrogen cloud, but then it has to be much warmer. So hot gas will emit. We did this. So just look back on in lecture 3, we did like when do we expect to see absorption lines, and then when do we want to expect to see emission lines. So now these ionization, so basically what are these spectra due to? They are due to the different ionization states of hydrogen and other elements, and that depends on the environment. And that is why we are interested in them, because by looking at those spectral lines, we are able to tell what kind of radiation field these stars have, these regions have, what is the density of the matter in there, and what is the temperature. Now these molecular species, they are detected via rotational, vibrational and vibrational transitions, whereas the ionized and atomic species are observed via electronic and fine structure lines. Even if you have not done atomic molecular physics yet, I think you might be doing it in the second year of your MSc, then you could see that there are certain things terms which will come back to you, and then you probably would appreciate that. Okay, so and these are pretty like important tools and probes to study systems which are far away from us. These spectra are studied also in the laboratories on Earth, terrestrial laboratories, but also we can observe these spectral lines from far away astrophysical objects. Now let's come to interstellar dust. Interstellar dust, as I said, is a very important, plays a very important role, because what it does is it absorbs a lot of radiation, a lot of the stellar radiation, and so it sort of obscures the part of the sky that we see. So what are those interstellar dust? So these are basically very thin, highly flattened flakes or needles of, they could be of graphite. There are two basic kinds of material which constitute the dust. One is carbon based and the other is silicate based. So basically it could be graphite like or it could be silicate like, and they are coated with water ice. What do I mean by water ice? It's like, so you can have ice of other gases also. So this is H2O. So because these are very cold, you will, if you have a very cold cold plate, say in a if you put it just in at room temperature, then you see some condensation. What is it due to? Because you have the warm air molecules which hit this cold plate and then they condense. So similarly, in the interstellar medium, because the temperatures are very low, these dust grains are very the dust grains are actually very cold. So you actually, the gas, what happens, they condense on it and then they form ice. So this is a typical structure of dust grain, and the typical size of these dust grains range between a nanometer to micrometer. And because of the size of, because such a size, they are very efficient in absorbing radiation which have wavelength of a few hundreds of nanometers and below. But however, the radiation of wavelengths which are larger than that, then if they are much larger than the size of the grain, then they are not affected by the dust. So what happens is that it will absorb the short wavelength or the higher frequency photons and then re-emit them, because it, in the process, when it absorbs that photon, it is actually absorbing the energy of the photon. So as a result, it heats up, and when it heats up, then it emits according to, say, sort of black body or some modified black body, which is representative of its temperature. And then that temperature is something like maybe around 300 Kelvin, and then the maximum that it emits will be in the infrared, and that wavelength is much longer than the size of the dust grains. As a result, once that longer wavelength radiation is emitted, it will just pass through the rest of the cloud, the other dust grains, as if they will not be seeing that radiation. So that's why finally, as observers, what we can observe is the infrared radiation. So that's what the role of the dust is. So now dust formation, where does dust form? It forms in the envelopes of red giants. So red giants, if you recall, we discussed yesterday that they become, so it's the latest stage of evolution of stars when they become very large, and becoming very large, what happens is that they become cooler. So in order to form anything solid, you actually need the system to be cold enough, otherwise it will just sublimate, right? If you have a very hot, like 10,000 Kelvin, you do not expect any solids to form. So but then when it is, so it's only in the outer envelopes of these red giants, the big stars, or even the asymptotic giant red stars, they are actually formed. And then because these stars lose mass, they actually leave out, they eject the mass into the interstellar medium. This dust gets dispersed into the interstellar medium, and also the planetary nebulae. I showed you some nice photographs of planetary nebulae in the last lecture, and so those are actually a combination of gas and dust. So it is the dust which reflects it. Now, what is the effect of dust? As I mentioned, that it causes reddening of starlight. So what does it mean? It actually absorbs, so as I said, it absorbs the higher, preferentially absorbs the higher frequency photons, like the blue photons. So if you had, say, white light, and if you had some dust material in between, then it would be absorbing all the blue photons and letting the red photons pass through. So this is called reddening of the starlight. So it causes reddening. And also, and the other thing is that it will absorb as well as it scatters. So scattering, as you know, it goes as lambda to the power 4. So if you lambda to the power minus 4. So if you consider that, this Rayleigh scattering, so basically that's smaller, the shorter wavelength photons will be scattered more. How does scattering matter? What will happen? Because if it scatters, say suppose some photon was coming towards me, but then it gets scattered and it just goes in some other direction, which means that there is a loss of photon along my direction of observation, which means that I will not see that. So that it is in principle, it is lost. It is equivalent to being absorbed as well. So dust is primarily detected via absorption, scattering, reddening, extinction, polarization, and finally the infrared emission. As I said, that as the dust grains are hot, we can see them in infrared emission. So these are examples of or the various ways dust rains are observed. So here dust is observed. So here this is once again an example where you see these dark clouds where there is absence of stars. But if you observe them in the infrared, the same cloud in the infrared, you see that the exact piece is observed where in the like in emission. Similarly, this is a reflection nebula. This is basically something that you see, so similar to the planetary. So this is a planetary nebula, and the pattern that you are seeing is due to reflection of the light from the star by the dust grains. So it requires a particular geometry and angle which would cause us to allow us to see the reflected light. And this is the final example. So this is the Orion nebula, Orion constellation that you are familiar with, and the Orion nebula is one of the stars on the sword of the Orion constellation. And so the warrior, basically warrior. So here, so what you see is that, so this is what you see in the night sky in the optical, and this is when you observe it in far infrared. That's what it looks like. It's very bright. Okay, so now just to summarize, basically, also dust has the role that it causes obscuration of starlight. So that's what makes it very important and necessary to understand. And as I said, this dust heated by starlight have temperatures between 10 to 300 Kelvin, and as a result, it emits continuum radiation, which can be observed in the wavelengths between wavelengths in the infrared and millimeter wavelengths. And so this dust emission spectrum is a probe of the physical conditions, because it is a reflection, or it is an estimate of the reprocessed radiation. So it tells us about the radiation which was incident on it as well. So that helps us to understand it. Further, this dust actually plays a very critical role in galactic evolution, because so dust are solids, right? So some of the elements will, if they're in the solid state, then they are not available in gas phase. So that makes a difference in what are the species that you can see in the gas. So I won't go to the details, but that matters. So one needs a proper inventory of various elements in the gas and dust in order to understand how the entire interstellar medium would evolve, and the evolution of the interstellar medium is what decides evolution of the galaxy. One of the most important roles that dust plays is that it provides a surface. So as I said, dust is a cold surface. So what happens is that it plays a very important role in the formation of, say, the very basic molecule, the molecular hydrogen, which is sort of the stepping stone for forming much larger molecules. So why is it important? Because if you consider the very low density environment of the interstellar medium, the possibility that two hydrogen atoms will collide and then come together and form a hydrogen molecule is absolutely zero. And even if they do, there is a problem with the conservation of momentum, because if they have to stick together, then the momentum has to be carried away by something else. So which means that you need at least a 3-body collision, and that's absolutely impossible to happen. Whereas if you have a cold surface and both the hydrogen atoms hit that cold surface beyond that, and then there are mechanisms by which they can migrate on the surface of the dust grain, and then they form on the dust grain. So the H2 or other molecule formation on the dust grains happens much faster. So dust grains also play a very important role in heating the gas, because dust grains are like solid state substances. So if they are bombarded with electrons, then bombarded with photons, the stellar photons, then they eject electrons, and these electrons which means that you are releasing kinetic energy into the interstellar medium. So you are heating the gas. So dust grains are important in heating the gas. And finally, the dust grains also are important to cool the system, because when we talk about the infrared radiation that we are seeing from the galaxy from the galaxy, it is actually leaving. These are the photons which are leaving the system, which means that it is taking an energy away with it, which means that it is cooling the system. So dust plays a very important role in the whole system. So now, I don't think I have time to stop, but I'll just then tell you. Okay, so what it looks like that, okay, it's possible that the interstellar medium, so it must be really like, one question that must be coming to your mind, that okay, interstellar medium, there are so many things happening, so it must be there must be a wide range of temperatures and densities which would be possible. And yes, indeed, but however, it is also possible to identify that sort of the interstellar medium actually occurs in phases. Like you can identify particular phases with typical densities and temperatures. How that comes about is something which is still being actively looked into, because interstellar medium is, unlike the stars, is a very open field of research, and a lot of information information are now coming in terms of observations, and as a result and it's a more complicated system to model because it's an open system. So now these phases of the interstellar medium, typically one can segregate them in terms of the ionization state of hydrogen, and like whether it's ionized or atomic or molecular, and also the temperature and density. So the first phase that we see is where the gas is very hot and it's ionized, and these have typical temperatures of 10 to the 5.5, and you see the very small densities. It's like you have only 1,000th of a particle per centimeter cube, and these such very hot gas are created by supernovae. Supernova, as you know, they inject a lot of energy. So where does that energy? It will ionize immediately everything around it and raise it, accelerate it, and raise it to very high temperatures. So so in this case, the hydrogen is ionized. One can also have slightly lower temperature ionized gas, which is more like at 10 to the power 4 Kelvin, so 10,000 Kelvin, and they could, but such medium can occur in two incarnations. One having densities about 10,000 per centimeter cube. These are called H2 regions, or it could also be that one particle or one atom per one ion per centimeter cube. So here the hydrogen, typically this ionization happens by the photons which are emitted by massive stars, these are not as energetic as the supernova photons. Then we have the warm neutral medium, which is almost at the same temperature as the warm ionized medium, but slightly less. But here the hydrogen is neutral or atomic, and it fills about 40% of the galactic disk, and it has about a very low. Once again, it has a very low number density. This is called number density, so number of particles per unit volume. It's about 0.6 per centimeter cube. And then next comes the cold neutral medium, where the temperatures are much lower, about 100 Kelvin, but the densities are higher. They are like 100 centimeter cube, 100 per centimeter cube, and it feels it fills up the rest of the about 50% of the ISM volume. And finally, we have the diffuse and dense molecular gas. As I said, hydrogen also exists in molecular form. So here the temperatures are between 10 to 300 Kelvin, and the densities are much higher compared to other densities that we have seen. So they are between 100 to about 1 million particles per centimeter cube, and here the hydrogen is molecular. So the point is that it's not very clear how these, so it is understood to some extent what causes these various, so this kind of phases to occur. It is basically a fine balance between the heating and cooling mechanisms which can happen at those temperatures and densities, which sets the different phases of the ISM. But the interplay between them is somewhat tricky because one doesn't understand how all the phases exist together, and like they do not get destroyed. Typically you see all of the phases, and here what you see is a distribution of such gas. So this is the distribution of the hot ionized medium. As you can see that so this is the picture of our galaxy. So because it is a projection, it looks this something like an ellipsoid. So this is, so you can look it up why it looks like this and not like a sphere. So then so here what you see is, so the midline is where the galactic plane is, but what you see is that the hot ion is almost 1 million Kelvin gas is distributed much farther away from the galactic plane. The warm ionized medium, which is, if you recall, is at a temperature of 10,000 Kelvin. So that, and also, so these big bright blobs are the places which have higher densities, like 10,000 per centimeter cube. These are the H2 regions. But in addition, there's a lot of gas which has a very low density, but it spreads well on the other, like it is found well above and below the galactic plane. And finally, here I have this plot shows the cold and the warm neutral medium. That is where hydrogen is atomic. The cold one is settled on the galactic disk. So this is the thin disk. This is where the star formation also happens. But the warm gas is spread once again on, like as shown in this the higher and lower latitude. So that's the warm neutral medium. And finally, the molecular gas, as you see, it occupies very little part, and it's mostly confined to the galactic plane, and it occupies absolutely like a very small volume. But these are the places where stars are formed, because these clouds are cold enough to form these self-gravitating objects. Now, these models of the ISM, what they do is they try to attempt to explain the existence and distribution of these different types of phases. But this is really a work in progress. We understand that to some extent, and we do not. So here is some like this is a model which sort of tells you how which is not all of it is fully understood or fully verified observationally, but the idea is that, so the thing is that we saw that there is a lot of hot gas above and below the galactic plane, and so the idea is that there are supernovae which are going off, and they are ejecting this very hot gas which are going up in the latitude of the galaxy, and then as they go up, they cool down and they come back and fall back on the disk. So this is called the galactic fountain model. So this is so, as I said, the field of interstellar medium is a very open one, and we are still understanding because it's a very complex system as well. So let me stop here and answer the questions.
Yes, ma'am. So, first question is about. So this is a general question. Like, if there is interstellar medium, why doesn't sound waves travel through it?
Yeah, it is. If you notice, it is interstellar medium and it's very faint. So, so how much you could calculate how much material do you need. So if you consider, so maybe the low densities that I have been talking about. So I'm saying 10 to the 6 something. But if you compare it with the, say, the terrestrial densities, what number densities, how many molecules do you have, say, in the per unit volume in the terrestrial laboratory? So that is something like 10 to the 18 or 19. So this is really a very thin medium through which nothing can pass in that sense. And obviously there is yeah. So within our galaxy, so that's why this is not possible. So there are no. It's possible to impossible to propagate acoustic waves in that.
Okay, thanks. The next question is the amount of dust constantly increasing as more and more stars reach red giant phase?
Yes, that's a very good question. That is true. So the thing is that that's why there is a distinction between there is a distinction between it depends on the metallicity of the system. So dust, as you understand, is made up of heavier elements. They are not hydrogen and helium, right? So so the older systems, like the systems which are in the past, they have much lower metallicity, so the amount of dust in them is also less. So as the system evolves, the amount of dust increases, you have heavier metals in the system. So that is the dynamic nature of the galaxy evolution as well. So the nature of the stars also changes. So the answer is yes, it is changing.
Okay, a related question to that then, what is the reason that stars are formed mostly in the spiral arms, and because
Yeah, so because
old stars?
so spiral yeah, so what is the old star? So to complete the question.
Yeah. So basically, the old stars are in the interior, and spiral arms have new
Okay,
stars
yeah.
being
So
formed.
So spiral arms actually signify places where the gas has been compressed. So you need to actually have somewhat enhanced densities in order for the say the first the process of formation of structure to kickstart. So the spiral arms, if you see that they actually are representative of density enhancements, and it's most likely that's where the stars will form. They are created by, say, some kind of compression waves. So that's where the star formation is the maximum.
Should we take one more question?
Yes, we started a little late, so we can.
Yeah. So though we are in the middle of our galaxy, how do we see our galaxy as a long patch in the sky as shown in the picture?
Okay, I think that it is sort of difficult to tell you, but see, if you consider, say, maybe the plot that I showed for, say, what. So what we are seeing, what we are seeing is the galactic mid plane. That is what we are seeing as a patch. So the plane of the galaxy is what we are seeing. So I think it's a question of 3D visualization. I don't know how to say it.
Yes.
Anybody else has a better idea? So, yeah.
Okay, maybe we can write it on the
I
with the
think
picture. We can post a picture.
yeah. Basically, I would need some additional props to explain this.
Huh.
It's a question of visualizing.
Visualization. So one last question.
Yes.
As shown in this picture, stars are present in spiral arms, but why are they not present in the region between spiral arms?
No, so which picture? Not the one that I am showing right now, right? This is
No,
not a
no, not
spiral.
the one.
Okay,
This
yeah.
is
Yeah.
earlier.
So that basically the gas density in between the spiral arms is very low. So it is actually very difficult to detect gas between the spiral arms. So it requires a lot of like dedicated observations. And often the gas is not in molecular form. So it has to be in molecular form in order for any stars to form. So basically, though, that is in atomic form. So though if the density is too low, what happens is that there is a general radiation field. So that doesn't. It is difficult to form structures in that. So you need there is a critical density beyond which the stars can form. So that's the reason. So there's not enough material between the spiral arms to form this.
Okay.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay, ma'am.
Yes.
So
Yes. No. Go ahead. Go ahead.
yeah, one last question. Do the size of galaxy varies with time, and what forces that basically they hold the stars in the system together?
Okay, so stars, so the change in size of the galaxy due to the stars inside it is that would be very small. So the forces means it's basically the general. So the galaxies are formed in some gravitational potential. So that is the general gravity, the galaxy formation theory itself. But what might change the size of the galaxy is interaction between two galaxies. That is what is seen very frequently. Basically, when two galaxies come close to each other, they sort of one galaxy can eat up another, and these are like very observationally seen very frequently. So in that sense, the galaxy merger, stripping of galaxies, like there is a sort of grazing between two galaxies, which sort of strips one galaxy of a lot of gas. These are all very common things which happen. But then so obviously the galaxy is losing mass from its outer, it would be losing mass from its outer edges, but that process, so one has to really calculate, but that is typically much, that has very long time scales.
Okay. So one question is, do we know why our galaxy is spiral?
Well, not really. Our galaxy is nothing special. There are lots of spiral galaxies, so it must have formed by the same way. So obviously, there are galaxy formation theories, and for us, like whether it's a density compression, density wave which swept through, or it is interaction with, we had something to do with the Andromeda. So, but I think it's primarily a question of as with the sun is a typical star. Our galaxy is also just a spiral galaxy. I don't think anything special happened to our galaxy in that sense. It's true for most spiral galaxies.
Okay.
Okay. I think okay. Anyways, we can continue.
So, what does it mean that a particle is highly relativistic? So, in one of the slides, you had
So I think
mentioned this.
you ought to answer this question for me. Whichever is asking, if it is from Zoom, maybe unmute yourself and answer. Like, when do you when are the relativistic considerations important? What is it compared to?
This is Prakriti.
Yeah, so maybe we can discuss this offline, but this is something very basic. You should also be able to answer this. So it has got to do with its energy. If energy exceeding some value, you can call it relativistic. So what is that value? It's not an absolute number, but it is relative to the particle that you are talking about. So that's a hint I would give. So try it out. If you still do not figure out, ask me later. Okay, so I think I'll stop here.
Okay.
Yeah. And
thank you, ma'am.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you so much.